So greatest common factor. This is always the first step that we need to do in factoring, all right? So I look at these two numbers and I look at the coefficients, the numbers out in front. You have 5 and 15. Look at the smallest one and see if its factors will divide into the larger one. 5 is the largest factor of 5. Obviously, it's a factor of 5. Is 5 a factor of 15? Yes, 5 times 3, right? So I'm going to say divide by 5. And then I have a variable, x. X to the third and x to the second. So how many of those x's can I factor out equally from them both? 2. So that would be x to the second, and this would also be x to the second. These are your greatest common factors. So the greatest common factor here of those two terms is 5x squared. Any question about that? We're going backwards. We're starting from number 12 and we're working backward. Well, I'm getting to B next, and then I'll get to C. Isn't 12 the last problem? Okay. All right, so then the greatest common factor of negative 1x and negative 3. All right, looking at your coefficients and your constants, you got a negative 1 and a negative 3. 1 is the smallest. And because the first one is negative, you always want to factor out a negative. 1 is a factor of 1. 1 is also a factor of 3. And since they are looking for the greatest common factor, I do need to write down something. Okay? So in this case, it's negative 1. This does have an x, but this one doesn't have an x. The second one does not have an x, so I can't factor out an x from both of them. All right? So my greatest common factor here is just negative 1. Does that make sense? All right. Now, letter C says, use factor by grouping and your answers to the above questions. So I'm going to be using these answers to factor this 4-termed polynomial, okay? When you have 4 terms, what do I need to look for or do first? I need to factor by grouping. You are going to divide it up into the first 2 and the last 2. Okay? First 2 and last 2. Now, looking at this, you need to find the greatest common factor of those first 2 terms. Guess what? You already did that from part A. Okay? So we're going to factor out 5x squared. And I still like to write it below because that helps me when I divide. Well, what do I have left after I factor that out? 5 divided by 5 simplifies to 1. X to the third divided by x squared, you subtract the exponents. So 3 minus 2 means I have x or x to the first here. Plus, now I have 15 divided by 5. I factored out that 5. 15 divided by 5 is 3. And x squared divided by x squared is just 1 because it's the same thing divided by itself, which is 1. So that is my factorization for those first 2 terms. Okay? Now, down here at the bottom, we're looking at negative 1x and negative 3. We already found that greatest common factor here. So I am going to divide by -1 because that's what my factor was. So out here I put -1. And what do you have left when you divide? -1 divided by -1 is 1. So I have x here. And -3 divided by -1 is +3. Now look at that factorization. Hopefully you notice that these two right here are the same thing. Okay? So that becomes the next new greatest common factor that you're going to pull out front. So I am going to take x plus 3, which is what I underlined here for both of them, times, what do I have left? 5x squared, and this -1. And that is your final answer. Now, this I believe I did right before I left. Okay? Did this help clear things up a little bit or solidify what you already knew? I'd love to see some of this or this. Yes, no, maybe. Okay? Any questions about that? So if you have 4 terms, you need to divide it into the first 2, find the greatest common factor, factor that down, and divide it into the last 2. Okay? Let's go to number 11. Number 11 says to factor and be sure to show all work. Okay, factor. Whenever it says factor, you need to think about the steps you need to take to factor. The first thing you need to do is to look for what? What do we always need to look for first? A little louder. A greatest common factor. So as you look at letter A, we have a 3, we have a -10, and -8. 3 is my smallest digit. 3 is obviously a factor of 3. Is 3 a factor of 10 or 8? No. The only thing that would be a factor of all of these would be 1, but that's not helpful to us in this situation. Okay? So I cross that off. Number 2, the next step. Is this a difference of 2 squares? Well, I have 3 terms here, not 2, so it's not that either. Number 3 is X box, okay? And yes, this is a trinomial, so I am going to use X box here, all right? First thing I want you to do is to label and make sure that this is in what we call standard form. And I don't think I talked about that a lot. But you should have your x squared first, your x term second, and your constant last, okay? Which this is. So this is in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. This is called standard form. Standard, I need to do a little smaller. Standard form, okay? So I want you to label what your A, B, and C are because it makes it really easy for you when you do the X. Right, Daniel? So A is equal to 3. B is equal to -10, and you have to be sure to take that negative with it. And C is equal to -8. Okay? So we are doing the X box. So I do the X here. And A times C goes at the top. My A value is 3. My C value is -8. 3 times -8 is -24. B goes on the bottom. B for bottom. B is -10. Okay? So I'm looking at two factors of negative 24 that add to give me negative 10. So it's negative 24. So I could think of 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6. Has to give me negative 10. Now, you might see this and say, ooh, that's 10, but to get a negative value, one has to be positive and one has to be negative. So that's not going to work. So we're looking at 2 and 12. And because this is negative, the larger number is also going to have that same sign. Everybody hear me? The larger number is going to have the same sign. So that means this is negative 12 and a positive 2. Okay? So then we do the box part. All right? And we have to do the box part because A is not equal to 1. If we get to A equals 1, I'll show you something that some of you might already know. So in the first box goes the first term, 3x squared. 3x squared. And the last box, negative 8, is filled with the last term. Okay? And then the middle two are made up of the factors that you just found for the x. And because we are dealing with the variable x, I also need to multiply it with the x. So this becomes negative 12x, and this becomes 2x. Any questions about that? All right, so then I look at each row and I try to find a greatest common factor. Okay, same as we would just with two terms. So I'm looking at 3 and 2. 2 is my smaller number. Is 2 a factor of 3? No. 2 times nothing gives me 3 as a whole number. So that means nothing there. I have an x squared and an x to the first. How many x's can I factor out? Should be 1. Okay. I have negative 12 and negative 8 for my second row. Because this first value is negative, you need to factor out a negative. And then I'm looking at 8. 8 is a factor of 8. Is 8 a factor of 12? 8 times some whole number give you 12? No. So try the next largest factor of 8. What's the next largest factor of 8? 4. Is 4 a factor of 12 too? Yes, it is. So this becomes your first factor, x minus 4. But now we need to look at our columns. I got 3 and a negative 12. 3 is the smaller one. Is 3 a factor of 12? Yes. So that becomes 3 up there. You've got x squared and x. Look at the one with the smallest exponent. So that's going to be an x. And finally, looking at this column, I have 2x and negative 8. 2 is my smaller number. Is 2 a factor of 8? Yes. So that means this is plus 2. So this becomes my other factor. And so my final answer here is x minus 4 times 3x plus 2. X minus 4 times 3x plus 2. That's a lot of work. But you have to do all of that in order to get this answer. Third period, 41. Oh gosh, not a lot of time. All right, let's go to letter B. Would you guys like to see one like that again? Or should I go to a different one? Another one like this? All right, letter B. First of all, you check, is there a greatest common factor? You've got, oh, wrong one. You have 5, 14, and -3. 3 is your smallest digit. Is 3 a factor of 5 or 14? No. You're looking at 1, but 1's not going to be helpful. Difference of 2 squares? No. And then finally we go to X box. Okay, so I need to do X box here. All right, so I am first going to say what my A, B, and C values are. What is my A value? Anybody? 5. Let's say it with some authority. How about what's my B value? 14. How about my C value? -3. Why do I do that? Because once I have those set up, I can easily set up my X. What goes at the top of the X? A times C. So that's 5 times -3 is -15. What does that tell you right away about your two factors? One has to be positive and one has to be negative, because a positive times a negative gives you that negative. B here is 14. So I'm looking at two factors of -15 that add to give you positive 14. Well, 15 only has a few factors, 1 and 15, 3 and 5. This is positive, so your larger number would have to be positive. And this one would have to be negative. So which of these adds up to 14? The first pair. So we got positive 15 and 1. So let's set up our box here. 5x squared, that is your first term. It's going to go in the first box. -3 goes in the last box. The middle 2 that you just found multiplied by x add up to give you that middle box. Okay? So looking at the greatest common factor here of 5 and 1 is just going to be the 1. X squared and an x is going to be an x. 15 and -3. 3 is the smallest, yeah? Huh? No, it's not. I don't think so. 15 and -3 gives you the 3. So there's 1. And I'm going to have to stop there. You guys will have to finish the next one. Please listen. I need you to try to finish this review for tomorrow. Okay? Also, you need to try to finish your homework. And if you have not watched those videos yet, please watch those videos. Okay? Take the time to watch them. All right. I will see you tomorrow. Fifth period is available, yes.